Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
And also, we were going to talk about firing a client.
Yes, we absolutely are going to do that.
Cool.
All righty. I still don't quite know why I don't pay attention, because I have this note that sits right in my thing, and it says, record. I guess you have to actually pay attention to the note. All right, we'll give it to Wilson to hold. All righty. So we are going to talk about unaffiliating with a signed client shortly. I want to just get through the needs analysis and into the document, because the document itself will start to answer some of that question, if that's all right. So we went through step number 1, which was setting the stage. We went through step number 2, which was needs analysis. Any questions or comments you have on either of those 2 steps? Seem pretty clear? Cool. So one of the things, this will be fun. This is new. Listen, it's rock everybody's world. One of the things we're going to do on Wednesday is I'm going to break you out into some breakout rooms. Have you ever been on a Zoom breakout room? Ooh, it's so much fun. So kind of 3 by 3, we're just going to kind of push you off into different rooms for 10 minutes or so, maybe 12. So you can practice a needs analysis. I want you to practice needs analyses with each other so that you can start to understand how that flow goes. Start asking the questions, start having somebody kind of deliver that information to you so your ears can hear it and your brain can process it and your hand can write it. And so you start understanding when and how you're going to use some of those questions, right? We talked about the 2 Qs and all the questions that go along with the 2 Qs. You're going to always quantify and qualify. So I want you to practice that a little bit with each other. The other reason we do practice on the needs analysis is that the person who's not being the real estate agent doesn't have to know much. They can just kind of make it up, because they can just talk about their own house and talk about what they're looking for, right? So it's an easy rehearsal session where the person playing the client doesn't have to have a whole lot of knowledge or script work about the process. So that'll be fun. So make sure you're on time. We'll do that on Wednesday. It'll be fun, I promise. So diving back into step number 2, we kind of completed the needs analysis question portion as we, as our time ticked away on Friday. By the way, where's Lisa and David? How was the wine on Friday?
It was delicious.
Excellent. I am so glad. And
which bottle?
Yeah.
The question is which bottle of wine that night?
Indeed, indeed. Well played. I like that answer. Clearly you had a better weekend than I did. All right, so we kind of finished through asking the questions, and I want to walk you through the rest of that process and then the rest of the needs analysis script to get us to that next step. So remember, you've asked all these questions. There's another term, another question, another phrase I want you to write down, because it's not in your materials, and I find it to be a really powerful tool in this process. You've probably heard me say it 100 times, whether you recognize it or not. And that 2-word term is what else? It's a great tool in consultation, because you've asked a question, you've given the opportunity for an answer, and now you're giving the opportunity for additional answer or additional clarification of the initial answer. And what I've learned to do is just what else people, until they kind of look at you and say, I don't think there is anything else. Awesome, right? Because now you know they've kind of been through, they've done that whole brain dump, they've emptied out on that topic, and there's nothing stuck in their head. I was just on a Zoom just prior to you guys, in which my main role was to just kind of ask some questions and facilitate a conversation between two other people. And that's what I spent most of my time doing. We had a couple of questions that we knew we had to get to. And as I threw them out and someone would answer, my next goal would be to say, okay, what else? What else? What else? Until all the communication about that particular topic was done. And then we went on to the next one. If you don't do that, especially in a needs analysis, what I have found is that people get stuck sometimes not giving you the one that they aren't sure about, or not giving you the one that maybe sounds silly in their head. But what's interesting is that when what else over and over again, the need to want to provide an answer to you oftentimes outweighs the worry that something that's in their head might not be exactly the right answer. And so you end up getting more information more readily, so as not to disappoint when you just keep what elsing. And again, when everyone's done, they say, okay, yeah, all right, that's about it on that one. Great, let's move forward. And then we can move on to the next. So write down what else at the bottom of your list of questions, and don't be afraid to use it, because it's a great, great tool. So step number 2, the needs analysis, does have 2 pages. And so we're at the top now of the second page of step number 2. That moves on in this manner. So Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, from our conversation, let's now take a look at what you've determined are your top 5 must-haves for your next home, right? So you remember, we got them down to, we took that whole big long list of needs and wants, and we put it on, we asked them to prioritize, right? And so the prioritization process for the top 5 must-have list goes something like this. So I'm curious, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, knowing that we just made an enormous list of the wants and needs that you're looking for in your next property, we now have to narrow that down to your top 5. I'm curious, what on this list goes in slot number 1? Like, if you could only have one thing on all the things that you just laid out for me, which one would it be? What's the most important? And then you ask that question again for number 2, 3, 4, and 5. And once you get down to the 5, you get to move on with this particular script. Now, by the way, I'm often asked, what happens if people can't agree, right? What if you have a couple who can't agree on the top 5 must-haves? So here's the fun answer to that. First of all, can you see, had you considered that, A, like what if you have 2 people who, boy, oh boy, they just struggle with agreement? Can you see how much better it is to know that before you head out and start looking at property, so you can start assisting in guiding them through that process? Somebody's going to have to sacrifice something. If you never have that conversation, man, oh man, I'll tell you what, you see house after house after house, and he likes it and she doesn't. And then the next one, she likes it and he doesn't. And then they almost like one together, but doesn't have something that one of them wants. It gets kind of nutty. So having this conversation right up front, I always used to turn it into kind of just a fun conversation, right? If you can see they're struggling back and forth, like, okay, offer rock, paper, scissors. Maybe that'll help solve the tie. And in every once in a very long while, when a couple can't come up with their top 5, because usually it's 2 and 2, and then it's a struggle for who gets the number 5, right? Every once in a long while, I have allowed them to handwrite in a number 6 so that they can each have 3, with a warning that this is a top 5 must-have. Just because you put 6 things on, it doesn't mean it's a top 6 must-have, because there's no such thing as 100% house, right? So understand that when we find 5 of these 6 things, that's still going to be an opportunity for us to prompt discussion of an offer. Do you see where that's written? If you look at the top of the top 5 must-have list, It says right there, let's agree that when we find a 90 to 95% house with your 5 must-haves, it will prompt discussion about making an offer. Tell me why that's written there. A couple of different reasons. Why is that there?
To remind them, because just because you're talking to them, it's down in writing and they're going to sign this, hopefully. And so that way that's always there for them to look at.
Absolutely. So it's a reminder for them 100%. Who else is it also a reminder for?
For you, for the realtor.
Yeah, for you. And I'll tell you, some of you are thinking, why on earth would I need to be reminded? Here's the answer to that. The answer to that is because sometimes you forget that part of your role is to be directive. Remember we talked about that term? You need to be directive. And so if some of you feel like it's a struggle to say, hey, you know what, does this one seem like you should be making an offer? You know, I'm reviewing it against your top 5 must-have list, and it seems like all the 5 are here. So it's there to remind both parties that when we see a property that has most of what you're looking for, knowing that it's never going to be perfect, we need to start having conversations about moving forward and writing an offer, right? Set the expectation and then deliver on the expectation. Yes, Carla. No? Okay. So now we're at the top of the second page of the needs analysis, right? And so let's take a look at what you've determined are your top 5 must-haves for your next home. And then we ask a couple of questions. Is there anything on that list that should not be? Or anything that we've missed? We're going to over-discuss their top 5 must-have list until we're sure that it really is the top 5 must-haves. We want them to keep looking and keep looking and keep looking. I tell you, I've had folks come up with a top 5 must-have list, and then I ask the question, is anything missing? And bam, right away, we all get fireplace. Like, okay, you haven't mentioned a fireplace once in this whole conversation. Talk to me about the fireplace. Yeah, you know what? We have 2 in our current house, and I didn't mention it there either, but I don't want to buy a house without a fireplace. Okay. So let's add it to the list. If we're adding it to an already filled out top 5 must-have list, what's the next question we have for them?
What do they want to remove?
Yeah, which one are you getting rid of, right? Again, always helping them model the fact that there may have to be some sacrifice. So if the fireplace goes on, something else comes off. And we can do our best to find both, and yet one is on the list and one is not. So it's a matter of importance. And then the next thing you're going to ask will be, let's just take a moment to prioritize so that we make sure these 5 are in order. Now, you've already done some of that, but then I want you to ask them to take a look at it again. Are you sure number 1's number 1, or is number 5 number 1? Sometimes they rearrange them. Sometimes they say, no, we're good. Now, again, this may sound a little bit like overkill to you. I will tell you, the more time that you spend in this needs analysis process and the more time you spend with them kind of in the exercise of maneuvering wants and needs around and discussing it back and forth with you and with each other and looking at it on a piece of paper and then kind of moving them around on the piece of paper. And then, as David reminded us, signing their name to the bottom of it. Why do we have them do that?
It's a commitment.
Yeah, because you sign important stuff, right? And so therefore they're committing to the fact that they've gone through this exercise and this is how they want to move forward.
And they always forget about it.
Right? And so because they forget about it, it is my advice that you don't start a day with your buyers. You don't enter house number 1 without hauling that sucker out and reviewing it. I will tell you, one of the things I used to do is before every appointment with buyers, I would make, if it was a couple I was working with, I would make 2 copies of the top 5 must-have list, and it would go on top of the listing sheets that I was handing them for the day. So we're going to see these 4 houses today, and just as a reminder for each of you, here's what we decided our top 5 must-have looks like. They got a copy every single time I saw them. Because Carla's right, they do forget about it. So you got to keep reminding them, right? You got to keep reminding them. Just keep bringing it up. And so then we asked that last question. This gives us a very clear direction in which to move in. Don't you agree? So then we move forward in the needs analysis with a couple of additional questions. So Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, is there anything about the home buying process that you are uncertain about or nervous about? Do you have any concerns or hesitations that you'd like to share with me? Why do we ask those questions? They're kind of the same question twice, right?
Because you really want to dig into what their so the psychology of what they're doing is. Some people are very nervous about spending money. Some people don't like to move, period. And you really need to understand what their motivation is and how they're feeling.
100%. That's right. That's right. And what's fascinating is that when you ask these open-ended style questions about, is there anything bugging you? Is there anything you're uncertain about? Anything you're nervous about? Any hesitations? Any worries? Anything at all, right? Concerns, issues. You'd be fascinated at what comes out. A lot of times, stuff comes up here that you weren't really asking about. And yet, again, knowledge is power, right? And clarity is power. So if knowledge and power and clarity are power, let's get all that up front so we know exactly how to move forward, right? This, I'll tell you, the time that I told you about, the time where I had the buyer who was in a lease for another 9 months, and I didn't ask that question up front, so they found the house and went to buy the house and then asked me about how they would handle the lease that they were in, right? Sometimes stuff like that comes up here. Sometimes stuff like, well, one of the things we're concerned about is we don't really have any money. I mean, we're approved for the loan, but we don't have any money. When do we actually have to have money to put down, like real cash? Sometimes that kind of a process question comes up right up front. Okay, well, so talk to me about how no money actually means. Like, do you have no money or a version of no money? Like, what are we talking here? And where is the money? Well, what I mean no money is it's tied up over here and I'd have to request a transfer or a sale of something, and so it takes 3 to 5 days for that money to show up in my account. Okay, so that kind of no money. Now we're in a better position. So what I would encourage you to do is, we're heading out today looking at homes in the $500,000 to $600,000 range, which means you'll need to have minimally 1% of that, so $5,000 to $6,000. Did I say 5 to 6,000? So 5 to 600,000. So you'll minimally need to have 1% of that when we find a house today. So $5,000 to $6,000. If you don't have that readily available, let's at least start moving those funds so that when you write that check for your 1%, when you find the house you want to buy today, we can move forward and have that check presented. Right? You want to help them be ahead of where they need to be. These are the kinds of things that pop up when you ask that question. Can you think of anything else that might pop up here? Sometimes additional process questions pop up here. For example, how do we find an attorney? For example, what are the inspections like? We've only ever done this once in Colorado, and we heard it's very different here. Now, I have no idea whether the process is all that different in Colorado than it is here, and yet it's a question that needs to be answered to help them move through their concern process, right? Now, one of the things that was a strategy of mine to help people move through this part faster was to take a lot of those process questions, which are steps number 3 and 4, right? Step 3 and 4 are explaining your value proposition and educate the buyers on the process. And one of the things that I used to do is save all those conversations for riding in the car. And I did that for 2 reasons. Number one, I wanted to move through the consultation swiftly, because let's face it, when people come to see you, what do they really want to see? Do they want to see you, or they want to see houses, right? They want to see houses. So moving through this process swiftly, which doesn't mean rushing it, but moving through it as swiftly as possible to get them out to see property, not at the expense of the consultation, but certainly not having a 3-hour consultation or even a 1-hour consultation. That's probably too long. My answer for buyers who said, so I'm curious, how long does this take? My answer was always 20 to 30 minutes, a little longer if you have questions. Because that's about what it is, right? It's about what's probably a 30 or 40 minute process all in. So don't neglect those questions up front. Keep asking so that you get all the stuff out. And then, of course, lastly, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, will you be paying cash for this home, or will you need to have some kind of financing? Now, sometimes you will have already asked this question on your lead sheet, right, when you're qualifying the appointment. Sometimes you want to ask it again. Sometimes, if you haven't asked it, sometimes you're going to skip over this if they've already arrived in the office with the document that Karen has given them to qualify them for the loan. Right, but if you do have to have that conversation and they say financing, then you get to say, well, so have you spoken to a lender? If it would be helpful, I can put you in touch with my lender. Again, most of the time, though, you've handled this up front because you want them to come with that letter. So question, what happens if there's no financing? What happens if you do have a cash buyer? What do you need them to bring?
Proof of funds.
Yeah, some kind of proof of funds. And what are you asking for in terms of proof of funds? When they say I'm coming to buy a $650,000 house cash, what are you asking them to bring along?
You might want
Bank statement.
So it could be a bank statement. What else?
need to know how liquid the funds are.
Yeah, so it could be a bank statement. It could be some kind of a stock statement. It could be a letter, right, from their attorney or from their financial person outlining what they have, right? It all depends, but you do need to have something. I would encourage you, and there are a lot of agents who don't do this, which is why I'm pausing and giving you some direction on this. A lot of agents hear cash buyer and think, okay, well, I don't need the document from a mortgage person, which is what we've said you need to make sure ability, right? Ability is the first qualifying checkbox. So when it's financing and you get to push them onto a mortgage person to do that work and provide the document, well, there's your ability. If someone says, I'm coming up to buy cash, many of you don't ask additional proof of funds questions because A, you think it's somehow intrusive, right? You shouldn't have to talk about their money, or that B, you might scare them away and now they won't come. Here's what I can tell you. Too many people say the word cash and they don't really mean the word cash. And so when you ask about proof of funds and they say, well, what do you mean? You say, okay, well, you said you're going to be buying cash. Any buyer is going to want to be certain that there's some sort of proof that you have the funds to purchase the $650,000 home. So if you wouldn't mind if you could bring along some document that outlines where the funds are currently sitting, most people bring copies of bank statements or stock portfolio statements, like the quarterly statement that one receives from their money manager. Some people say, I'm not giving you that. And that's okay too, but now they have to they take the additional step of having their attorney or their financial person issue some kind of a statement about the funds that they have available. Something with a name and a number on the bottom of it, so that you and or the buyer, that the listing agent that you present an offer to, can call to verify the funds, because those things will happen. If people aren't verifying funds in cash transactions, I think there's a whole lot of risk there, right? So you need to have somebody with some authority over these funds being able to have a conversation around it. So what's my point? My point is, be careful about cash, because sometimes when people say cash, what they mean is, I'm obtaining a mortgage and it's all cash at the closing table. I've had that happen to me umpteen times.
Hey, Rick.
Yes, ma'am.
Am I correct in today, a lot of people won't even let buyers in to see their house unless they're fully qualified. So they would really have to bring something that proves that even if they're a cash buyer, that proves that they actually have the cash to buy it.
Yeah.
Or they couldn't see the house, right?
Great point. And so let's pause there a second, because Lisa brings up a really, really excellent point, and it's a topical discussion. I've had this very conversation 4 times since Thursday, right? We have a lot of things kind of going on all at once right now. And a lot of times what that means is sellers are unwilling to show the property until or unless certain documentation is either provided, signed, or there's something on the table for the seller to look at. And what that means is, when you're working with buyers, again, you need to set a very clear expectation. Understand that 4 months ago, the world kind of went sideways on us, and we're still living in that universe of many sellers don't want to allow strangers to walk through their home for a physical showing unless they know for certain that they're qualified, which would mean some kind of documentation, either proof of funds or a pre-approval letter, which oftentimes has to be sent ahead of time to the listing agent before they clear the way. Some sellers are still insisting on some kind of a questionnaire or some kind of a health form that says, look, here's what we know about ourselves, before they'll allow a showing. And yes, the MLS says that's not allowable. We've taken a slightly different position that says we think the MLS is stupid, or at least misguided in their judgment on that, right? And so our sellers still sometimes ask for that. And showing buyers out in the field, I guarantee you'll run into it, because it's not just us that are still asking for those kinds of things. We leave it in the seller's hands, and some sellers really want that kind of stuff. So you may have to jump through some hoops. The other thing I'll mention, because it's happened twice in the last couple of days, is that some sellers ask for an offer to be written on the property prior to being able to see it. Now understand that is their right. If they choose to state that they like an offer before you can see it, they have that right. Clearly the buyer has seen the photos and has seen whatever virtual tour and has read everything that is available to them, and they like it enough to know that they want to see it and walk through it. However, in today's world, there are some sellers, we literally just sold one this morning, where somebody was inquiring about the property last week, and Debbie told them, that these are the rules for this particular property, and they said, well, that's ridiculous. How can my people make an offer on the property without even seeing it? Debbie said, you know what, do the best you can, and that's the requirement for seeing it. And there was a whole lot of, that's silly, And guess what? Just sold it to somebody else who was willing to do it. Right? So here's my point. You can stomp your feet and hold your breath about some of the rules that some sellers put in place to be able to view their property in today's day and age. Or you can just follow the directions, encourage your buyers to just kind of play along. No one's saying you have to make an offer and that's the offer that will ultimately go to the attorneys, but you may have to just put something in writing. It shows the sellers that you're serious and it makes them feel better about allowing you to walk through the property. So just write the offer. It doesn't matter. Don't get hung up on some of this stuff. So that is the world you are stepping into. Yeah, and so what one would do, Niels is asking, in this case, can the offer be rescinded after the buyer sees it? Yeah, absolutely. You would make it contingent upon a valid walkthrough of the property, right? So you write the offer, you do the best you can, you throw out a number or do whatever, and you make it contingent upon either the inspections and or a walkthrough. Right? I think I told you I did this just 2 weeks ago on a property that I bought in New London. I made an offer, I hadn't seen it, I made it contingent upon me seeing it. The first time I was able to see it was at the inspection. But it got me in the door and it got me the accepted offer. So recognize that expectation setting in this scenario is oftentimes necessary to make sure that your buyer understands the arena they're entering. Not all buyers are willing and able to play under the rules that we have currently right now because they think it's unfair. And that's okay. They're not fair or unfair, just by the way. They're just the rules. They're just sometimes that's what you run into. So be careful that you're not making it worse. Because I know a couple of agents who say things to their clients like, can you believe this seller? Oh my goodness. How ridiculous. What an overreaction. Well, they have a right to be overreactive if that's what you want to call it. You just have to decide whether or not, you and the buyers have to decide whether or not you're going to play the game that they've set. Right? One of the things that we used to do, that Debbie and I used to do on our listings back when I was still in the field with her, is during the last shift, so 2007, 8, 9, we used to require that the buyer get pre-approved with one of our lenders. And when I say we would have a consultation with the seller to say, it is in your best interest today, as things continue to fall apart financially, that one of our vetted mortgage people puts any buyers that you consider through their process to get them pre-approved. The buyers didn't have to use our partners to write the mortgage. They could use whoever they wanted as long as they were also pre-approved by our partners. And most of our sellers said, yeah, we see the value in that. And it was fascinating to say to agents for the buyers, so here's the deal. We'll consider that offer. However, the seller would like for the buyers to be pre-approved. While we're talking through the first stages of this offer, the sellers would like the buyers to be pre-approved by the seller's choice of mortgage professional. Oh, and the buyer's agents would yell and scream, and you can't do that, that's illegal, antitrust, this and that. Okay, we'll just sell the house to somebody who's willing to do that then. Does the seller have a right to ask for a pre-approval from somebody they've chosen? I think you kind of know the answer to that, right? I wouldn't have done it if it was illegal. So yeah, of course they have that right. Did it limit the pool of buyers who were willing to play on that particular house? Sure, sometimes. And we were very upfront with the sellers about that. This may limit the number of offers you receive. And the sellers were smart enough to say things back to us like, Well, but isn't that okay? Because then the offers that we do get, we know are stronger buyers. If they're not willing to be pre-approved by a second party, we're not sure we want to waste our time going down the path with them. Right? Here's the other thing we got a lot. And I'm telling you this because I want to prepare you for, because you're back in it again. You're back in that same kind of twisted sideways world that we were in 12 years ago, 10 to 12 years ago. You're in that world as buyer's agents today, where the rules seem to be different, on different streets that you're showing. And so, wow, I forget what I was going to say. Well, I guess it must have been a lie. I don't remember what I was going to say. I was talking about pre-approvals with mortgage. The thing that was thrown at us more times than not, just in case you ever hear this, is, well, we can't possibly be pre-approved with somebody else because we just got pre-approved over the weekend with this person, and it's going to destroy our credit. Did you ever hear that? The fallacy that if somebody else does a soft pull on your credit, that suddenly you're going to drop 20 points. First of all, that's not the way it works. It might reflect a point or two. And here's the thing. If they're that concerned about that point or two, are they as valid a buyer as the pre-approval letter states? Or are they kind of just on the cusp, on the edge there? Are those buyers who are going to do something between now and closing when the credit gets pulled again, and now the program that they qualified for required a 720 and now they have a 716, they don't qualify for that program anymore and they have to start all over again? See my point? See, I had to be thinking about all these different things. All right. So there was a little bunny trail. I'm sorry about that, but I wanted you to understand how that works when you're entering into an arena like that. Hey, so what do you do when the buyer brings their own mortgage person to the table and it's not someone that you know or that you've vetted? Does that ever happen?
Yes.
Yeah, sure it does. Right? And so what do?
You ask to see the documentation.
So yeah, you make sure that there's documentation, and then there's some scripts right here at the bottom. One of the things I'd like to do is make a quick call to this person whom I don't know and just introduce myself and ask a few questions about how they do business. Since we're all going to be playing on the same team, I find it helpful for everyone if we begin that relationship early. Does that sound okay to you, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer? And then I call. I want to make sure that this person has done the work that my people would do. I want to make sure that the phone number on the pre-approval letter actually gets answered by the person who signed the bottom of the letter. I want to make sure that it's not, I will tell you, I already had a buyer present a letter that their aunt wrote. And I thought, well, that's very interesting. And I asked a very important follow-up. I said, oh, that's great. I'm curious, is your aunt a loan officer? And they said, no. And I said, oh, well, that's interesting. I'm curious, why did she write the letter? And she said, well, you said we need to have some kind of a pre-approval letter. So we got our aunt to write us a pre-approval letter. Like what is the story? Excuse me, just half a second.
Sorry, guys. Those two, can they be dated August? Do they have to be August or July?
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Either or.
Okay.
Lisa's choice.
All right. Bye. I'll let her know.
Okay. So you never can tell, can you?
That's so sweet, though. They didn't know. They didn't know.
Well, it is, and it's so, you know, it's funny. It brings up one other thing that probably should be mentioned out loud. Like, be careful about the assumptions you make about what people know and what they don't know, right? Because when you do this every day, I'll never forget my first couple of months as an agent. I was at a listing appointment with sellers, and I was talking about what I was going to do and how this was going to work. And I said the term CMA over and over and over and over and over again. And after like the 6th or 7th time I said it, they kind of held their hand up and said, I am so sorry, but you've said that term CMA a whole bunch. We have no idea what that is. Can you explain to us what that is? And I felt like an idiot because it was lingo that like I had just learned. And so I thought everybody knew what that lingo meant. So be careful when you're throwing industry lingo around or just making the assumption that when you say, I need you to have a pre-approval letter and bring that with you, that people understand that it needs to be written by somebody in the financing field, right? You need to have some version of, unless your aunt is going to lend you the money, in which case now we're talking about cash, so now we have to have a whole different conversation, right? All righty. Any other questions on the needs analysis? The whole next couple of pages ultimately are additional questions and then you sharing your value proposition and educating the buyers. Now, as I mentioned, steps 3 and 4, share your value proposition and educate your buyers. They, for me, were car talk. Well, guess what we're not doing any longer? We're not putting people in our cars, right? So here's what I would encourage. What I would encourage, especially with either first time or we haven't done this in a while, buyers, I would still encourage some of these conversations as car talk in between houses. I know that social distancing says, let's not be in the same vehicle. And I encourage that wholeheartedly. However, I think it's a mistake not to stay connected to your buyer in between properties. And so I think today, one of the things that I would be doing is I would set the schedule for these 4 particular houses and let them know, hey, so after we see the property, we'll have a quick download before we get in our respective cars and head to the next one. And to make sure that you have no additional questions and that we're not cutting our conversation short, because typically I would have you in my car and we'd continue these conversations. I'd like to just dial you and put you on speaker and just talk to you. So now you're having these conversations in the car on the phone instead of face-to-face. How's that sound? I'll tell you, one of the things you lose is body language because you can't see them. And yet, to do everything you can do to stay connected, why is it important to stay connected in between houses?
Well, it keeps their
Because they
focus
can
on
start
what,
thinking different things and you don't know what they're thinking. They may say, well, wow, that was on our top 5 list, but now it's not on our top 5 list. We don't want a 2-story. We want a single story, whatever it is.
Yeah. I'll tell you what my experience is. All of the learning happens in between houses. It doesn't happen at the house. It happens in between, because that's when they're doing the download between the 2 of them. And if it's a single person, that's when you're typically having a discussion with them. All that downloading, all that kind of, I like that, didn't like this, wish it had this, it happens in between houses. So don't make the mistake of letting that go. You have a way to stay connected in between houses, and I think you should use it. And so that continues to allow me to say to you, run through this value proposition script, run through the educate your buyers scripts. They're paragraphs about different opportunities, benefits and specific things that can happen when you purchase a home. For example, one of the things I used to ask about in between houses was, so now that we've downloaded that house, I'm curious, how much do you guys know about radon? And we'd have a radon conversation, right? Sometimes the answer was, what's radon? And then when you get to say, oh, it's actually a naturally occurring gas, which happens naturally, which happens in the earth from the decay of, you know what it is? Nothing good. Radon comes from nothing good, right? Or they say, oh yeah, we have one of those mitigation systems in the house that we have now. We know all about that. You need to gauge what they know and how they know it so that you can have a conversation around it. Because if they're buying something in Fairfield County, guess what? Radon's a conversation. Why is radon a conversation here? Right, because it comes from the seepage of the gas through the ledge. And guess what most of Fairfield County is built on? Rock and ledge, right? Unless you're selling something right down along the coast where it's a little sandier, you've got radon issues. And you don't always have radon issues that have to be handled, but you always have a radon conversation, right? So know what that looks like. Another topic I would bring up is inspections in general. I'm curious, have you ever purchased a home in Connecticut before? And how have you handled your inspections? Well, as a reminder, here's what we do those for. Here's how I work them. Here's how you and I will be on the same page when it comes to inspections. I'm curious, do you have an attorney in mind? Oh, you do? Great. Who is that? I'm curious, are they specifically a real estate attorney? Oh, they're a New York attorney? That's when you have to stay on the road. Oh, no, please not a New York attorney. You pull over right then and there and say, okay, we need to get out and have a face-to-face about this. New York attorneys closing Connecticut transactions is 98% of the time a really big problem. If you haven't figured that out by my driving off the road visual, right? Because the rules are different state by state. And New York attorneys tend to over-attorney buyers in Connecticut. It's just something I've noticed over time. I don't know about the rest of you. Anybody else want to agree with that? Yeah, so we have some agreement there. Yeah. It's nothing against New York attorneys. It's just real estate's different in Connecticut, and so we really prefer to have a Connecticut-based attorney. So you're having that conversation. Well, no worries. If you don't know anybody, I have a great team member who I can refer you to, right? So you're just vetting the whole process with them so that they understand all the different pieces, right? You're setting all these different expectations, informing them about radon, informing them about buried oil tanks. I'm curious, what do you know about buried oil tanks? Oh, is that a thing? Like, what is that about? So here's how that would work. If we come across a buried oil tank, here's what we would do, right? So when you've done all that work in between houses, guys, here's what happens. When you finally find a property that they want to purchase and some of those things come up, they're already anxious, right? Because buyers who make offers on properties, just by human nature, are anxious. They wouldn't have made an offer on the property if they didn't care about the property, and because they care about it, they're anxious for the negotiations to kind of go the way that they're hoping. If during that period of time, all of a sudden they have to start learning about radon and figuring out how to handle an oil tank that's buried in ground, and also having to figure out who they're going to hire for their attorney, and oh my goodness, where is the septic inspector going to come from? And oh my goodness, what happens when we do you see how it just kind of builds and gets a little bit much all the time you're making an offer or negotiating through an offer? I'd rather you minimize a lot of that angst for them by having those conversations up front. Remember, conflict only arises from unmet expectations. So make sure you're setting valid expectations up front. And this is just another process you can use to set those expectations about what's going to happen. I had a coach once who taught me one of the best phrases ever. You should write this down. That phrase is, here's what's going to happen next. Here's what's going to happen next. Regardless if you're working with a buyer or a seller, talking to another agent, talking with your spouse, talking with your children, talking with your parents. It's a great phrase. Here's what's going to happen next, because it gives everyone a heads up about what's about to happen so that when it actually happens, no one's surprised. Make sense? So can you see how a lot of these conversations done in between houses and used as connection points so that you can keep the conversation going, not only do that, but also give them valid information for what they're about to embark on. Awesome. So what I would encourage you to do as part of your homework is step 3 and step 4, read through those paragraphs on your own. Some of that stuff is crazy valid. Some of it's a little less valid, but it will give you an idea of some of the topics that you can start having discussions around in between houses, even today on the phone. And looky here. We are on step number 6, close for the agreement, which, by the way, is really step number 5 if you're counting. I changed it after I typed this up, and I never changed step 5 and step 6. So in your packets, step 6 comes before step 5, and that's done on purpose. You can change the numbers if you want. But the next step, which says step 6, close for the agreement, you've now been through the set the stage. You've told them about the hiring conversation that's going to be had. You've gone through a 20-minute or so needs analysis to make sure they and you understand at a really deep level exactly what home they're looking for. You've helped them create a top 5 must-have list. You've asked additional questions about their financing, any concerns or worries they might have, any kind of process issues that might pop up. You've answered any and all questions, and now guess what? It's now time to have that hiring conversation that you foreshadowed in the beginning. Well, you didn't foreshadow it, you told them it was coming, right? So you want to know how to do that? Let's go through that. That'll be fun. So here's what we're going to do. In your packages, you should have a copy of the exclusive right to represent buyer document. It looks like this. It's 2 pages. It was sent with your other documents that day. I think it was sent separately, but it's there, whether it's part of the package, part of the consultation or not. So I want you to haul that out, but also be looking at step number 6, which is close for the agreement. Because what I'd like to do is I'd like to have somebody bring us through the script, and then we're going to dive into the document and kind of go through the document paragraph by paragraph so you understand what it says and how you use it. And then we'll go back and read the script again. And once we've done that, you can see how the script actually just overlays the document and gives people kind of a layman's version of what the document actually says, so that with most people, you're not necessarily going line by line through the buyer contract. You're giving them an overview and then having them review it, and they can ask any specific questions that they might have around that. Does that sound like a good plan? Yes? Okay, good. So who wants to volunteer and bring us through step number 6, close for the agreement? It's a fun one to read. Who's brave? Who's not really texting? Come on. Someone will do it if I wait long enough. People are smiling, looking down, thinking if I don't look at the camera, maybe he won't pick me. Who read the last one? I think John read the last one. So it's not going to be John. John's in his car, so we definitely don't want him reading. Okay, who's going to go through it?
Oh my God, I'll do it.
Thank you, Lisa.
This is mastering the buyer consultation, correct? Which I changed to step 5, close for the agreement.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. So let's get down to, and I'm not going through the right to represent form. I'm just going through basically my script here, correct?
Yeah, through the script. So you're going to bring us through the
Okay.
script, then I'm going to bring us through the form, and then we'll go back to the script.
Okay. So let's get down to the legalese portion of our meeting. As you know, it's Connecticut state law that you and I work under a written agreement of representation. After all that we've discussed this morning, can you see how it would benefit you to have somebody looking out for your best interests as you search for the best home and negotiate its purchase?
I
So
absolutely
this
can.
form, oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I'll give you time to respond next time. So this form allows you to officially hire me so that we can move forward with finding a home for you. And it outlines all of my duties and responsibilities to you, as well as yours back to me in this partnership. It also outlines how I get paid. Most of the time, my compensation is paid by the seller through the multiple listing service. So for all intents and purposes, you get to have all of my services for free. How does that sound?
That sounds awesome.
Well, there may be certain circumstances, such as by showing you a for sale by owner or a home that for some reason or another is offering little to no compensation to the buyer's agent. And in circumstances like those, you may be asked to pay for a portion of or the entire commission. However, we'll discuss any of those homes first prior to you seeing them so that you fully understand your financial obligations should you choose to pursue those few exceptions. The good news is 98% of all the homes that we see together will not require that conversation, and you will always have ample notice of any homes that do.
Got it.
Furthermore, the document goes on to explain that at all times I must abide by both federal and state fair housing rules, which means I may not be able to specifically answer some of your questions. However, I will always guide you to a resource that can. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does.
Great. Okay, so all that is left to do is to sign the contract and we're off. And you've made an excellent decision here today. Perfect.
Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you very much for volunteering. I do love that about you. And so that's the script that kind of allows people from a 10,000-foot view to understand the contract that they're about to sign. It does all of the things that are mentioned in this script. Any quick questions or concerns about the script or ahas that you see inside of that script before we dive into the actual document? Anything that you notice that surprises you? Go ahead, Donna.
It doesn't surprise me, but one of the things that I love about that script is that it tells your client exactly how you get paid, because they actually don't know how that all works. So it's a nice eye opener, and it's a nice kind of peek behind the curtain for them.
100%. I love that you said that, because it's so true, right? And I want you to be clear, or I want to be clear about something. I said this last week. I want to reiterate it. One of the ways that I have learned how to create trust with people is to do or say something that they don't expect you to do or say, right? And one of the things that I think this script accomplishes by being very upfront, because if you look at paragraph number 3, it states right there, oh no, by the way, this also outlines how I get paid, right? We're not hiding behind anything. We're not assuming that I don't get paid. We're not talking about it just in case. Because I don't recommend any of those approaches. The approach I recommend is written right there in paragraph 3. So by the way, before we decide to be in business together, here's how I get paid. And let's talk about that. Because mostly it is how you think. It is through the seller, through the multiple listing service. That's most of the time. And yet there are certain circumstances where that's not the case. And we'll talk about those certain circumstances. I will also coach you guys through how you handle those circumstances as we go through the document, right? Does it surprise anyone that there might be certain circumstances where we would ask the buyer to pay our commission?
No.
Oh, that's good. This must be the advanced class. I love that. Here's what I have learned. Far too many real estate agents. This says 98% of the time, all the homes we see together will not require that conversation. I would say 90 to or better, maybe 90 to 98% of all real estate agents won't have this conversation with their buyers, which is a mistake. They need to understand how the money works. It's their money. Guys, either way, isn't it their money that pays you? Whether they're writing you the check directly or writing it to the seller, who then pays the listing agency, who then pays you through the MLS. Isn't it all the buyer's money? So I think we owe it to them to make sure they understand how their money is being spent and under what circumstances we expect to get paid, right? When you have an objective commission conversation on either the seller or the buyer side, by the way, because this conversation is even more important on the seller side. But when you have an objective commission conversation and you don't hide from it, nobody can scratch their head and say you didn't tell me, right? Later on, if somebody goes and cheats on you and goes to an open house and buys the property directly through the listing agent while you're under agreement with them, and we come back to them and say, you bought a house? Congratulations, I am so excited for you. You'll get my invoice for $16,000 in about a week. And oh, by the way, I wish you the best of luck in that new home. We'll talk about that a little bit in a second. I'm in the middle of 2 of those right now. Someone decided to not follow the rules. Do they have a right to do that? Yeah, of course they do, right? They have a right to do it. There are just consequences. To me, it's like being married and dating, right? Oftentimes, those 2 things don't go hand in hand. And so if you're married and you choose to also date, do you have a right to do that? Well, sure you do. And yet there are usually consequences, right? This is the same kind of thing. Because signing a contract with a buyer is kind of like being married for a short period of time. We're exclusive now. You don't get to see other people. Now it's just me, right? All right, so let's go through this document and answer any questions that you might have. Does everyone have the document in front of them? If it's all right, what I'm going to do is I'll bring you through this document. Oh wait, John has a question. Do radon, mold, and termite tests have the same timetable as an inspection? Yeah, so generally speaking, John, and we're going to get through this when we go through on Wednesday, when we go through the anatomy of a buyer transaction. We're going to go through all that information. But the quick answer is usually building inspectors, besides doing the building, are also looking around for termites and looking around for mold. And they typically set the radon canisters as well. So it's usually all in one scenario. It all gets done at the same time. And sometimes you have to wait a few days for the radon results and the water results to come back. Does that answer that? Yeah, and we'll go deeper into that when we do the anatomy of a buyer transaction on Wednesday. So the exclusive right to represent buyer form starts out at the top that says Connecticut law prohibits a real estate broker from representing or negotiating on behalf of a buyer unless the buyer signs a written agreement of representation. Everyone remembers that, right? Everyone knows. And for those of you who still need to take your test, Please be certain you get that one right. Because it fascinates me, truly fascinates me, how many people still decide to go forward and work with buyers without signing this document. I just want to be clear, it's not a choice you get to make. Not without consequence, right? Because the law in our state says that buyers need to be in a written representation agreement. And if a buyer says to you, hey, you know what, I've seen a whole bunch of houses and no one ever asked me to sign this before. I get it. My answer to that is, well, thank God you found me. Because if those people are willing to break the law before they even walk you into a house, what kind of a transaction is that going to turn into? Seems like it was destiny for you and I to find each other. Because I follow the rules. And me following the rules is only a massive benefit to you. Because guess who else follows the rules? The sellers whose properties you're going to be making offers on, and the listing agents who represent them. So when we all follow the rules together, can you see how it's a massive benefit for you? Yeah, me too. Phew! You dodged a bullet, baby. I only say that half kiddingly, right? Don't get freaked out if someone says, hey, no one ever else asked me to sign it. Nobody else ever asked me to sign this. Part of the script, that the objection handler for that, you have to look right at the screen when I do this. Part of the script is this. That's part of the script. I'll do it again. Because you have to kind of be horrified if people are asking people to show them houses and they're not having consultations and representation conversations, right? So I would start out with horror and then ride in on your white horse to say, thank God. Thank God for me. All right, number one, exclusive right. The buyer, what goes there? Not a trick question.
Buyer's name.
Exactly right. The names of any buyers that are going to be purchasing the property. Appoints Keller Williams Realty as the buyer's exclusive agent for the purpose of buying a property or acquiring interest in suitable real property acceptable to the buyer. Right? So remember that the exclusive right is a representation right between the brokerage embodied by me as the broker, right? The brokerage and the client. The brokerage and the client. Number two, the geographic area. This appointment can be limited by the buyer to the following area of the state of Connecticut. What goes in there? Also not a trick question.
State of Connecticut.
So, if in fact you are going to have someone signed for the entire state, what's interesting about this form is that you can leave this form blank. You can leave this line blank. Because if you read the way it's written, it says this appointment can be limited by the buyer to the following area of the state of Connecticut. If it's not limited, it's just valid for the entire state. However, I don't recommend the state of Connecticut. Here's why. Just by a quick show of hands, for those of you who are brave enough to be on the camera today, by a quick show of hands, how many people know where Brooklyn is? Brooklyn, Connecticut. Oh, see, all of a sudden, most of the hands go down. We got a couple of people who know where Brooklyn, Connecticut is. And what's fascinating is there's an area in Waterbury called Brooklyn, and then there's actually a town called Brooklyn over in the quiet corner over by Rhode Island, I think is where it is, in Connecticut. So here's my thought. If you don't know everything about all the towns in Connecticut that you might be asked to represent, you probably want to step back from representing a client in an area you know nothing about. until or unless that client who's worked with you a lot in Fairfield County wants to all of a sudden go up to, say, Litchfield County. For me, it was New Milford. I knew all what I needed to know about Fairfield County, and then I had a client one day say, I'd like to go and see New Milford. And I said, I appreciate that. I don't really know a whole lot about New Milford. I know where it is. Other than that, I don't have an expertise there. So what I'd like to do is find you an agent to refer you to. And they said, no, we want to stay with you. We want to stay with you. And I said, okay, so here's the deal. Now this is going to date me because I couldn't just pull it in my phone or I couldn't stick it on the GPS. I handed them the map of New Milford. The Hagstrom map of New Milford. Half of you are like, Hagstrom, what does that mean? Is that a company? Yes, it's a map company when we used to use maps. I'd hand them the map and say, okay, you get to be the navigator. As long as you tell me where to turn, right or left, and understand that if you ask me questions about New Milford, like where the schools are and like where the churches are and how it works here, I won't know the answer. I can find you the answer, but I won't know the answer. And I had a very clear conversation with that particular client saying, I'm not your guy for New Milford, but if you want me to be, I'll drive up there and figure it out. I sold them a house in New Milford and it was fine. Just be cautious about representing buyer clients, especially in towns and cities that you know nothing about, not without full disclosure. So.
Can I ask a quick question?
Of course.
So if you didn't put the full state of Connecticut and he went to New Milford, this customer of yours, and you didn't have New Milford in there, and he bought a for sale by owner in New Milford, then you would have no recourse for that then.
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. So one of the things that I used to do was get very clear about the towns I would represent, and I would write into this line. So say I was going to be representing them in Danbury, Bethel, Brookfield, and New Fairfield. So I write those 4 towns in, and I would write in and others by referral. So you can reserve the right to refer them to other areas of the state if you want to just kind of keep yourself a bit covered. It's certainly an option for you. But I like town by town by town, or address by address by address. So Spencer's question is, can you write county? I recommend not. And here's why. Should I run my test? I'll run my test. Okay, so again, by a show of hands, and some of you who are not on camera do have a little hand button that you can use, by the way. So if you want to use that. By a show of hands, how many people believe that Sherman is in Fairfield County? Just by a quick show of hands. Sherman in Fairfield County. So we have a couple of people who say yes. How many people believe that Sherman is in Litchfield County? So we have a couple of people on Litchfield now. Yeah. Let me ask a different question. How many people believe that Stratford is in Fairfield County? Just by a quick show of hands. And then how many of you believe that Stratford is in New Haven County? So here's the point I just made, right? We all live and work here. And we don't have clarity as a group as to which towns are in Fairfield County and which are not. By the way, Sherman and Stratford are both in Fairfield County. With Greenwich, they make up the 3 points of the triangle that make up Fairfield County, right? Greenwich, Sherman in the north, and Stratford in the east. However, if you don't know that, and you just decide to sign a buyer because you can by writing Fairfield County in there, if you don't know it, how are they expected to know it? How are they expected to know it? And they're coming from Des Moines, Iowa, or from San Francisco, California. They certainly won't know it. And so there is precedent in our judicial system in Connecticut where judges have ruled against brokerages attempting to secure a commission where the documentation just said Fairfield County, because they found that there was not enough evidence that that was clear enough for the buyers. Yes.
Can I ask, yeah. So if you don't find that putting a county in that on that line there is a good idea, can you put multiple towns? So let's say we have a buyer and they're looking at Greenwich and they want to, and you never know, but potentially they're going to want to see properties in New Canaan and Darien and Westport. Can you put multiple towns? Like, how do you get around that so you don't lose the potential business?
Yeah, so during your consultation, one of the questions you will ask is, where are you thinking of purchasing a property? And then when they give you an answer, you will what else them, right? Grace, what else turns into where else? Where else might you consider? Sometimes I have clients who are looking in Greenwich who also decide they'd like to look in New Canaan, Darien, and Westport as well. And so I'm curious, does it make sense to add those to our agreement now so that we're covered in all cases and I can be validly looking for you for properties that meet your criteria in all of the towns that might work for you?
Okay.
And then we list them, yes. And so it's just literally listing the towns with a comma in between each of them, and you pop them all in there. Here's the other opportunity. If in fact someone decides that they want to see something in Ridgefield, and then all of a sudden they decide they now want to start looking in Wilton because the commute in Ridgefield maybe is too long and they want something further south, and you only have a Ridgefield agreement, in that dialogue, you can simply say, if you're willing and able to show them Wilton as well, you know what, great, let me start showing you sending you some properties in Wilton. I'm also going to send you via DocuSign our buyer agreement because I need to add Wilton to our written representation agreement before I can start sending you information about that town. And so you send that off, add the thing, and they just initial the add-on, and you're good to go.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Yeah, sure thing.
Great, thank you.
Cool.
But if they specify, if they know that it's a broad search and they understand Fairfield County, if they say Fairfield County, is it okay? Like they're saying, well, we don't have to be, we'd like to be closer to, blah, 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 up to Westport, but with COVID, we now have more latitude to go further out. So why don't we just say all of Fairfield County? If they understand Fairfield County and they know the boundaries, is it okay? Or do you still just want to name every single town?
You still want to name every single town, and here's why. Because I have had issues in the past where clients, not buyers necessarily, but clients per se, they will say something like that. And then when they go ahead and they buy a property in Monroe without you, because they just didn't think to ask, or they didn't know that you did Monroe, and Monroe's in Fairfield County. Is Monroe in Fairfield County? Yes, it is in Fairfield County, right? All of a sudden what creeps in, I call selective amnesia, right? Because now they've conveniently forgotten that they said out loud to you, I understand Fairfield County really well, because now they know they have an obligation to pay a commission that isn't going to be handled by the listing agency because they went and bought with somebody else. So I would still encourage you to list the towns because that's clear. It doesn't get clearer than town by town by town by town. Does that help? What else, Donna?
So the other thing that sometimes happens when you're where elsing them, you want to be in Greenwich, do you also want to look in Westport, Darien, and Canaan? Sometimes they look at you and they say, oh no, we already have an agent for Darien, which is information that you may not have gotten out of them until you pointed out the fact that it's town by town, we're going to write this in.
Yeah, great point, right? Because especially if you're dealing in one of the three towns that have their own still separate MLSs, right? Greenwich, New Canaan, and Darien. Sometimes they don't play well with others, right? And so sometimes those agents will happily sign someone for the town they represent, period, and then look to have somebody else represent them elsewhere, right? That happens. And so Donna makes a great point. If you're not doing town by town by town, you may run into an issue where now they're represented someplace that you didn't know about. All signs point to town by town by town is truly the best path forward on getting that documentation clear. All right, number 3, term of agreement. This agreement shall begin on blank and expire at midnight at blank. What goes in there are actual dates, right? And generally speaking, the term is going to be anywhere from 3 to 6 months. That is a typical term. 3 to 6 months is a typical term. You can make decisions based on how you run your business as to whether or not you think 3, 4, or 6 months makes the best sense. I'm not a huge fan of terms that are longer than that. I do see some buyer agreements that are for a year. Frankly, I think you're sending the wrong message. If you're utilizing 12 months, why on earth do you need 12 months to sell someone a house? It doesn't take that long. It takes maximum 30 days for someone who you've had a needs analysis with to find a property that they want to purchase and go ahead and purchase it. That doesn't mean they're going to close in 30 days, but it takes them 30 days to find the house, make the offer, and start moving forward on the process, right? So don't send the wrong message that this takes forever, because when you send that message, guess what you get? You get buyers who believe that you've already sent the message that this takes forever, and so therefore, let's just take forever. Yes, Nikki.
If you don't sell by the end of the term, can you extend the term longer for another
Yes,
3
ma'am.
months per se?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Absolutely. And what I would encourage you to do is monitor your expiration dates, and a couple of weeks before that expiration date, have a sit down again to say, hey, you know what? I know we haven't quite located that property. I do want to bring to your attention that we're about to expire. And so in order for us to continue working together without interruption, let's go ahead and sign and you can do it as simply as crossing out the expiration date, writing a new one in, and have everyone initial it. You don't have to go with brand new paperwork, right? So you can keep it simple, but yes, you can extend if necessary. Questions on the term? Okay, let's get into the meat and potatoes of the document, because that's 4, 5, 6, and 7, right? So number 4 says the broker agrees to attempt to locate a property acceptable to buyer, negotiate on the buyer's behalf, and act in the buyer's interest at all times, right? That's A, B, and C of number 4. And it just outlines our duty to the buyer client. Number 5, their duties back to us. Because if you remember in the script, we said to them, this form outlines our duties to you and your duties back to us. So that's numbers 4 and 5 is now outlining that. So number 5 says the buyer agrees to A, tell broker about all past and current contacts with any real property or other real estate agents. B, utilize broker exclusively in following up leads. C, cooperate with the broker and be reasonably available to see property. D, give broker financial information or personal info that might be necessary to secure the purchase. And E, schedule all appointments to see a property exclusively through the broker. What do you notice about A on this form?
It's bold.
It's in big, bold print. So let me tell you a quick story. About a year ago, I had someone call me and say, I need your help. I said, awesome, what's the issue? I said, well, I met this afternoon with a buyer, and as I was going through the document, she got really upset, like really upset. And I didn't know the answer to her question. And I said, well, I'm curious, what did she get upset about? She said, well, she got upset about 5A. 5A, she read and said, why on earth is it any of your business what I've done prior to today? You're asking me to tell you what I've seen and who I've done it with, and frankly, that is none of your business. How dare you ask me that question? Why on earth is that on this form? I don't believe this, and just really got upset. And I said, wow, how did you answer? And she said to me, the agent said to me, well, that's why I'm calling you, because I didn't know what to say. And so I told her that I would speak to you about it and get back to her. So I called And I got this woman on the phone and I said, yes, I understand you met with, Maria Smith earlier today, and there was a question about our representation agreement. And she got just as upset with me on the phone, making her point about how outraged she was that we were asking her this question. She said, why on earth is it any of your business? And I said, you know what, that is a great question. Thank you so much for asking it. Would it surprise you to know that we ask that question to protect you? And she got really quiet. And she said, how so? And I said, well, if we don't ask that question and you've gone out with people prior to meeting up with us and for some reason may have entered into a contract with that other brokerage, not only do we have to have slightly different conversations with you about taking steps forward with us, but if we didn't ask that and you had done that with someone else and you signed our document, you could be financially obligated to pay more than one commission should you buy a property through one or the other of us. So it really is for your protection that we ask that. Does that answer your question? And she said, she took a big pause and she said, yes, that answers my question entirely. And thank you. Thank you for explaining that. That makes a lot of sense. I had never thought about it that way. But guys, then she asked me the question that I didn't have an answer to. She said, I'm curious, thank you for explaining that. I appreciate it. I appreciate the fact that it's part of your process and your documentation. I completely understand it now. However, I'm curious, why wasn't Maria able to explain that to me? Good question, right? This is why we go through these documents kind of line by line with you, because sometimes people ask very specific questions about something in this document, and you need to have an answer for it. Miraculously, just so you know the end of that story, miraculously, I can't remember how I answered that question, but I did it in such a way as to not throw Maria under the bus and just try and move us forward. And I got Maria and this buyer client back together the following morning. And they signed the document and moved forward, and Maria sold her a house. That's a rare occurrence. When a buyer is that upset and you can't perform and answer the question, you usually don't get a second bite at that apple, right? So just recognize that you need to understand how to explain this stuff in such a way that people get that it's a protection for them, right? I'm going to give you objection handlers and understandings that have this document be all about why this is a protection for them, right? Does it also protect you and us? Sure, but it's a protection for them first and foremost. Any other questions about B, C, D, or E? They're all pretty self-explanatory in number 5, right? Okay, let's get to the good stuff. That's 6 and 7. That's where the juicy stuff lies. Number 6, 6A, buyer agrees that the broker may represent other buyers and show other buyers the same property the broker shows to the buyer. Buyer needs to realize if any of the firm's buyer clients have an interest in a particular property, that information is considered to be confidential and will not be disclosed to other clients. So let me interpret that for you. What that means is Spencer has a listing. I have a buyer who's interested in Spencer's listing. I go and show my buyers Spencer's listing. And then I get a call from a separate set of buyers saying, hey, Rick, we just saw this property come on the market. We know it's not exactly what we were looking for, but we think we might want to change change some of our criteria and see that property too. Can you show us that property? So now I have one buyer who I'm showing Spencer's listing to, and now I have a second buyer I'm showing Spencer's listing to. Can I do that? Yeah, sure. Now buyer A says, ooh, that's the one for us. And we write an offer. And then buyer B, 3 hours later says, ooh, that's the one for us. And now we write an offer. So now I've got 2 buyers, both of whom want to write offers on Spencer's listing. Can I do that?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. What can I tell each of the other buyers about the other buyer?
Nothing.
Nothing is exactly right, including the fact that they even exist. And that's the part that sometimes some of you get stuck on, because it feels like you're cheating. It feels dirty and nasty, right? However, understand that your document keeps you safe in this scenario, because your document, when they hired you as their buyer's agent, your document says, look, I may have other people interested in the same properties that I'm showing you, and I may have other people making offers on those properties. And if that's the case, I simply can't tell you. Just like I can't tell the other person about you. It's all about confidences. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Questions on it? Okay. Here's what's fun in that situation, just from an agency perspective, if you want to have a little agency fun. In that scenario, Spencer would need to tell me that there are multiple offers on the property, as long as his seller said it was okay that he tell me there are multiple offers on the property, before I can go back to either of my buyers and tell them there's more than one offer on the property. Even though I wrote both of the offers, for all intents and purposes, I can't know there's multiple offers with each of the other buyers until the listing agent tells me. So in that scenario, I present offer number 1, then I come and present offer number 2, and I have to say to Spencer, you know what, could you do me a favor? Could you make sure it's okay with your seller and then verbally tell me there are multiple offers so I can go back and tell each of the set buyers that there are multiple offers? Because until he tells me there are multiple offers, I can't go back and tell either buyer there are multiple offers, because it breaks the confidentiality that I promised each of those buyers in that specific scenario. Isn't that crazy? That's one of those fun agency things. It doesn't happen very often, so you don't have to worry about it too much. And yet, it is kind of fun. At least my version of fun in my world. That might give you an idea of how limited my world is. 6B, broker may share and disclose non-confidential information about the buyer with other agents who offer property for sale. Let me ask you this. What is considered non-confidential?
Financials.
So financials, non-confidential. What else? So here's what I've learned. Best with a buyer to assume that everything is confidential until or unless they say okay to share, right? If you just assume that everything is confidential until they give you the okay to share it, you don't have a problem when something comes out that they thought was confidential that you thought was in the non-confidential column. So if you just keep one column and that's everything is confidential, you don't have to worry about knowing what is and what is not. I'll give you a quick example of that. We had an agent who came to me and who didn't come to me. Their client came to me about a month after she sold them a property. And he said, this is who I am. This is who represented me. I just wanted to bring something to your attention. Again, it was after the fact. They had purchased the property and it wasn't really a complaint. He just thought I should know about it. And he said, so-and-so was great. I thought she was awesome. I will refer her to family and friends. I just thought it was a little interesting that when she wrote the cover letter for our offer, and we're going to talk about cover letters on Wednesday, but when she wrote the cover letter outlining our offer, she wrote it very specifically. And what I mean by that is she wrote that, my wife and I, Mr. and Dr. John Smith, come from where we come from and listed all the things. And he's describing the letter to me and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm not getting it. What's the issue here? And so we got to the end and he said, did you catch it? And I said, you know, with all due respect, I didn't. And he said, she disclosed the fact that my wife was a doctor in the cover letter. And I just kind of think that that could have put us at a negative negotiating position because people automatically think that doctors make a whole ton of money. And when he said it, I thought to myself, wow, you know what? I didn't catch it when he described the letter, but now that he says it, he's right. He's right that little prefix in front of their name may have sent a signal to the sellers that they didn't need to negotiate quite as much because, hey, it's a doctor. Again, it wasn't a complaint of his, but that's a perfect example of something that you innocently think is non-confidential because somebody could Google the buyers, I guess, right? And find out that she's a doctor. But that didn't come from you then. And this guy just thought I should know. And it's interesting because since he called me about it, I teach it every single time I have an opportunity to discuss this because I think it's a valid point. And so when you're working with somebody's information, consider all of it confidential until somebody gives you the written okay to share it. 6C, buyer understands this agreement is an exclusive appointment and will supersede all the other agreements, including open agreements. The buyer represents that they're not currently bound by another exclusive agreement. And in big, bold letters at the end, the buyer agrees not to enter into another exclusive agreement with any other broker unless this agreement has terminated, right? Again, protection for them. We want to make sure they get very clearly that if you had something beforehand, you have to tell us. And once we put the ring on the finger a bit, you're not dating anymore. Now we're exclusive until you buy your house, right? Until this agreement is then over. 6D, this agreement may be terminated. Now we're back to David's question from Friday, right? 6D, this agreement may be terminated if the agreement expires, the buyer and the broker agree to terminate the agreement in writing, or, well, death. It's not written on here, but just so you know, if the buyer dies, they're automatically released from the. We can't enforce this upon their heirs, right? So if the buyer dies, they're out as well. The broker reserves the right to reassign the contract to another agent in the office, and we may elect to refer this contract to another company. So David asked the question, how does one fire a buyer client, right? That was the question, I think. And so generally speaking, the firing of one's client or the firing of one's agent, once this document is signed, ultimately comes back to me, right? Because the brokerage is the one who's in the agreement with the buyer. If you come to me and say, look, I have no interest in this person any longer, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. So I'm curious. Do you think it's a personality issue? Because experience tells me that 85% of the time, it's a personality issue, right? This person is driving you berserk, but in the hands of somebody else who just has a different behavioral style than you do, they're just not as bad, right? And so rearranging people inside of the office and passing people from one agent to another is typically how we handle that. Now, if you come to me and say, okay, so I need out of this agreement with this buyer because they're lying and cheating and stealing and, I mean, if there's issues that are not just a personality issue, or we determine based on hard evidence that this is someone who is never going to buy a house, right? There have been people who they keep making offers and withdrawing them, right? There's always some weird thing going on with why they can't follow through. And at some point it's like, let's move on. And in that case, we may look to terminate the agreement ahead of time. But typically, whether it's the buyer complaining or you'd prefer to move away, what we typically do is all that comes back to me. We have a conversation around it, and we normally just reassign inside of the office. When that happens, so say David was looking to pass somebody off and we decided that John was a better fit. David and John have a conversation about a referral fee once John actually goes and sells them a house. And so understand part of the reason, or a main part of the reason that we reassign inside of the office, is to keep you plugged in to some version of income because you've spent time, effort, and energy with this particular person, right? So it's to protect your income and still get the job done for the client. Oftentimes, if the client themselves wants to terminate, they're not thrilled with that solution. It is the solution I offer, however, right? Make sense? Does that answer that question? Cool beans. 6E, this agreement may be modified, waived, or discharged only by a written agreement between the parties, right? So again, it's a bilateral contract. Bilateral contract. It means the client can't just up and decide one day, I no longer like you, and so therefore I'm moving on. Right? I have two scenarios right now where somebody called me and said, it's not working out. Well, tell me what the issue is. And they couldn't or wouldn't tell me what the issue is. I don't want to get anybody in trouble. It's just not working out. Okay, well then great. So we'll reassign you to, the reason I ask what the issue is because when we reassign you, I want to make sure that that issue doesn't pop up again, right? Well, I don't want reassignment. I want to go and use somebody that I found who sold my brother a house. I said, got it. Unfortunately, that's not an option I'm entertaining right now. So if you'd like to explain a little bit more about how we can help you and how we can reassign you inside of the office, right? And both of those people chose not to be reassigned and chose to wait out the contract through January. That's their option too, right? That's their option too. Number 7, we're on page 2. This is about the money. So let's deal with paragraph 7. Let me get through the whole thing and then I'll go back and answer questions. So 7 is called the professional service fee, right? It is how we get paid. It says the buyer agrees to the following compensation arrangement. 7A, the buyer agrees the broker is entitled to a fee if during the term of this agreement or any extension, the buyer enters into a contract, purchases, or acquires a property acceptable to the buyer. So P.S. they don't have to close during this agreement. They just have to enter into a contract during this agreement. If the buyer attempts to avoid the obligation under this agreement, then the buyer shall be obligated to pay the professional service fee. So if you choose to wipe your hands of it and say, sorry, I'm going to go cheat on you and figure out, you can figure out how you get paid. Well, by signing this, the buyer is already raising their hand saying, I understand when I do that, I'm obligated to pay you a fee. So 7A says that they understand that they owe us a fee. 7B, the professional service fee shall be 3% of the purchase price of the property purchased. If the amount offered through the MLS is less, the broker may elect to reduce the fee. If the buyer wishes to purchase a property not listed through the MLS, i.e. a for sale by owner, or i.e. something that was on the MLS and then expired or canceled off of it, that didn't go back on, the fee for that is 5%. So 7A says that we're due a fee. 7B just quantifies the amount of the fee. 7C, broker will make every effort to obtain the professional service fee from the seller, the listing agent, the buyer broker fee from the MLS, or structured within an offer to purchase from the proceeds of the sale from the transaction. So 7A says we're due a fee. 7B quantifies it, and 7C outlines where it comes from. D, if the broker receives a fee from any of the above sources in excess of the amount stated in this agreement, the buyer agrees that the broker may accept that amount. That's a bonus. Sometimes in the MLS, it may say that you're due 2.5% as the commission, and yet if you have something, if your buyer comes in and you put the property under agreement by August 15th, you get a $2,500 bonus. So all this is saying is if we're offered a bonus over and above the stated commission that we're due, that the buyer understands that and says, yeah, you go ahead and take that. It's just a disclosure. 7E, the fee is due no later than the date on which title real property transfers. So in other words, it's due on the closing date. right? The obligation to pay a fee will automatically extend through the date of the actual closing, even if this agreement expires. So if your agreement expires while your property is pending, this automatically covers you through the closing date. So 7A says we're due a fee. 7B quantifies it. 7C outlines where it comes from. 7D says if bonus, you can keep it. And 7E gives a timeline for when it's due. Any questions about paragraph number 7, about how we get paid?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes, Alicia.
On B, so what does that mean, 3.5%? Because say on MLS it says broker's fee is, compensation is 2.5%.
Right, so if the fee on the MLS is less, that's that second sentence there. If the amount offered through the MLS is less, the broker may elect to reduce the fee and just accept that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then how do you do the 5%? Is that if it's off MLS, then they have to, the buyer has to give you 5%?
Correct. So off MLS properties like a for sale by owner or something that has expired or canceled that hasn't gone back on, we do charge more. We charge more because when there's no other agent involved, trust me, you do both sides of the work.
And who
Who
pays
does
the
that?
buyer? The buyer pays that, or does the FSBO owner pay that?
So your agreement with the buyer is for 5%. If in fact you can negotiate a portion of that to come from the for sale by owner, right? Sometimes for sale by owners are protecting brokers, and so they'll pay a fee out to a broker. So maybe they'll agree to pay half. So now if you're getting paid half from the seller, you could reduce the buyer's commission to you just down to 2.5%, because what the buyer agrees to pay is 5%, and it seems fair to me that if you're getting 2.5% from the seller, that you would only make the buyer responsible for the other side of that, right?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I'll tell you that understanding that your buyers owe you 3%, and then having policies in your business around what you will accept and what you will not accept. For example, for me, I accepted anything offered in the MLS that was 2.25% or better. So if it was 2.25, 2.5, 2.75, even though it was less than the 3% that the agreement said, I never went back to the buyer and asked them to close the difference. I just accepted what was offered, 2.25% or better. However, if it was 2% or less, I would go back and have a conversation with the buyer to say, so just, and this is important, right? Because you have to make that disclosure before you show them the property. So you're getting a bunch of properties lined up to show them, and you notice that one of the 5 you're showing them that day, has a 2% commission. Well, because you've already had the consultation, they know that there are certain circumstances where they might owe a fee. And so if 123 Main Street is one of those scenarios, I get to make that phone call and say, hey, Spencer, I sent you a bunch of stuff to look at for us to go out and see this weekend. I want you to note that 123 Main Street does fall into the category that we talked about during our consultation. And that category is where you might owe an additional fee. I always called it cheap seller syndrome because I wanted to at least make it humorous and make it a little memorable and make it not about me. So I made it about the seller. So for me, it was called cheap seller syndrome, right? And so the seller, for some reason, is only offering out a reduced commission. And so I will, if you want to see that particular property and then choose to purchase it, I will need to look for you to make up the difference. They're offering 2% and our agreement says 3%. So as long as you're willing to make up the 1% difference, we can go and see that particular property. And if not, that's okay. We're just not going to then go and pursue that property. But that needs to be your decision. And then Spencer gets to make a decision, right? So yes, no, I definitely want to see that property. Awesome. So as long as you're aware that that one will have that extra 1% that you'll need to throw our way, at the closing, then great, we go and see it. Does that make sense to everybody? It's as valid a conversation as any other you'll have with a buyer. I will tell you, a lot of people are afraid to have the conversation. What I would encourage you to do is understand your value, understand that you get to make decisions about who and how you charge that, regardless of what you decide. Anytime you decide to charge an extra fee on the buyer's side based on the agreement that you signed earlier on, you need to remind them. You can't bring them across the threshold of a house, have them fall in love with the house, and then say, oh, I'm so glad you like this one. Remember that conversation we had 2 months ago where you were going to pay an extra fee? Well, this is one of those. That's not fair, right? They need to make a decision about whether they're going to see a house that might have an extra fee attached before you go and show them the property.
Hey, Rick.
Yes.
Is there anything that, that you wouldn't have them sign an addendum, a disclosure, or anything, just saying, yes, I had a conversation before we went to see this house that I would be potentially responsible for additional payment?
Well, so great question. And the good news, Lisa, is that you already have their signature that you get 3%.
Right.
So when something is brought to their attention that's going to require them to make up 1%, you already have the contract in place that says you get 3, the seller is going to provide 2, they just have to provide the 1. You just haven't had the conversation with all of the other properties that were offered out at 2.5 because you were willing to accept that.
Right.
Does that help?
Makes sense. Yep.
Awesome. All right, guys, it is 6 o'clock. And before I am wine glassed off the stage again, I am going to recognize that we are out of time and close for the night there. So here's what we're going to do. First thing on Wednesday, we are going to finish this form. We have just a couple of things to talk about. We have some fair housing discussions to have, as well as a dual agency quick conversation. We'll then go back to the script, finish off the script, talk about some strategies and script work to help buyers narrow things down as you're heading out with them, and then move to the anatomy of a buyer transaction, which outlines the actual transaction itself and how you process buyers through that. Sound good? Excellent. So here's what I'd like you to do, because we ran out of time before I got to ask it. Instead of putting in the chat box how many of your appointments that you secured this past week in week number 2, what I'd like you to do is just email me tonight before you go to bed how many appointments out of how many you secured this in week number 2. There's the email address. If you want to text it, you can do that too. There's the phone number, and go from there. Make sense? All right, guys. I'm gonna scoot. I have a 6:15 appointment. I will, Selnev, if you can do me a favor and call around 6:30, 6:35. I should be off the phone and can take the call. Guys, have a lovely evening. I'll see you tomorrow morning if you're on the 9 o'clock. If not, I'll see you on Friday.
Wednesday.
Wait, Wednesday.
Wednesday. Thank you. Phew.
Okay, bye.
Bye.